Okay, so welcome back to my channel. Okay, we have finally made it to the end. Netflix series Ratched, season 1, episode 8, Mildred and Edmund. But before I get into the recap of episode 8, I'm going to do a quick recap of episode 7, the bucket list. So we found out that, which we didn't really find out, it was obvious that Finnegan has a crush on Mildred. And after asking her out, she revealed to him that she prefers the company of women. He was disappointed yet understanding and agreed to keep her secret. So we'll see how long that lasts, okay? After Louise went into Nurse Ratched's room, after Nurse Ratched went to the dance, she found the recording. The recording is Father Andrew's account of that evening when Edmund killed the priest. And it's also recorded that when Nurse Ratched performed the lobotomy on Father Andrew. And now this evidence is in the hands of Nurse Bucket. Once confronted, Nurse Ratched came clean about her past and how she falsified documents to get into the army, and how she is not a nurse. She has never been a nurse. She's always wanted to be a nurse, and how several soldiers under her care end up dying, and that was the cause of her being discharged from the army. She also admitted that she did falsify the letter that she claimed came from Hanover, claiming when she came in for the interview, she admitted that she didn't really need to admit that because Nurse Bucket already knew that, but she did anyway. Dr. Hanover's, aka Dr. Manuel Benyaga, was removed. He was fired, and before leaving, Nurse Bucket actually admitted that she did, care about him, and that she really believed in what he was doing, and he admitted that he, felt bad about the way he treated her and, the whole thing. And she basically told him that the police are on their way, and he got to going. And so before he left, of course, he decided he was going to take Charlotte with him. Charlotte is the woman with the multiple personalities, because in his mind, he feels like he will be able to regain his career and his professional credibility. And somehow the criminal charges against him will all go away if he's able to cure Charlotte. So he takes her and he leaves the hospital with her, with Nurse Ratched's consent. Unfortunately, it was a mistake. I believe Dr. Manuel Benyaga should have left Charlotte exactly where she was, because in the end, one of Charlotte's personalities, Apollo, which is the more masculine personality, ends up killing Dr. Benyaga after her being re-traumatized, and this personality resurfaced to, I guess, protect her in some way. So of course she called Nurse Ratched, who came to her aid, and got her on a bus to Mexico, and she decided she would deal with Dr. Manuel Benyaga's remains. We find out that she ends up taking the head to Miss Osgood, which is what Miss Osgood wanted. Initially, she said she wasn't going to do it, but then she feel like, I didn't have to do the dirty work as far as killing him, but you know what? Let me go ahead and take this head to Miss Osgood so I can get this money. Which is what she did. She took the head to Mrs. Osgood, and she received the $100,000 that was agreed upon. Now, unfortunately, Miss Osgood didn't fare as well. Once she presented the head to her son, he ends up, the viper and the lunatic that he ends up setting her up to be killed. And so one of the gardener's maids ends up killing his mother. And of course it was at his request, because he really deep down hated his mother, because he blamed his mother for everything that's happened to him, even though everything that has happened to him has been completely his fault. But again, he's a lunatic. The social worker found Nurse Ratched, and they sat and talked, and Nurse Ratched finally found out about Edmund's past, about his parentage, about his mom being a nun, being raped by the priest. being I guess she left the order, she became a prostitute, and then she died of a drug overdose, and that's how Edmund basically ended up in the system. And one of the 4 priests that he killed was actually his biological father. So of course at this point Nurse Ratched is shocked, and she kind of feels, you know, betrayed, like she's been doing all this to help him and she never knew this stuff about him. One good thing that came out of it is that she was finally able to be honest with herself and with Briggs, and she had finally admitted her feelings for Miss Briggs. But unfortunately, Miss Briggs did reveal that when she went in for a scan, after, you know, I guess just a checkup after the surgery, she had to remove the bullet. They found a lump in her breast, and she does in fact have breast cancer, and only has so much time left. And so that is the disappointment, to find out that the woman that you love, not just the woman, the person that you love loves you, but your time with them is could be limited. So that was sad. And the coup de grace, which really made me cackle like none other, as when the lawyer for Miss Osgood's estate, she gathered the household together to read the will, and it was revealed that 50% of her estate is going to go to an arts foundation that she was very fond of. She was really big in the arts, and so she decided that half her estate would go there, and the other half of her estate would go to her pet monkey that you always saw on her shoulders, and that her son will spend the rest of his life in a psychiatric hospital. So the look on his face was priceless. All his vindictiveness, all his hatred, and his backstabbing against his mom, who all she did was take care of him. Now it was her fault that she, you know, fueled his psychosis, but without her, his cushy life goes away, and it's too late for him to do anything about it. So now, with his no arms and his no leg self, he will be in a psychiatric hospital, which is probably his worst fear. He will be there for the rest of his life. And on the up note, Nurse Bucket gave a speech to the staff, basically letting them know about the regime change, and she also promoted Finnegan to head nurse. And that is basically how episode 7 ends. It's a lot that happens in between, but that is basically the crux of that episode. So if you are interested in hearing my recap for episode 8, Mildred and Edmund, stay tuned. So for whatever reason, Nurse Bucket decided to hire Louise as a candy striper. I guess, you know, to give her, I guess, something to do with her life. I guess just being a front desk clerk wasn't good enough. So she's now working as a candy striper in the hospital. She's pushing this trolley of decrepit looking toys that she's made, and she's talking to one of the patients, Mrs. I forget the lady's name, but she's like all in the woman's face with this shrunken head doll and talking all in this crazy voice, and eventually the woman was like, just leave me alone, go away, right? So Louise called her into her, Nurse Bucket calls her into the office, and she was like, I gave you this job so that you could do something with your life, not so you could terrorize the patients. And so they talked for a little bit, and Louise gave her the newspaper where Edmund was on the front cover saying that, you know, his execution was scheduled for 2 weeks, and Louise she's not happy about that. She really, you know, believes that Paulson is mentally ill and that he needs help, and she doesn't think that execution is the correct, I guess, course of action for him. So Mildred and Briggs are together, and they're having a little moment, and Briggs, you know, could see she gets sick. And so when she goes into the bathroom, you can see she was running her fingers through her hair, and her hair is starting to come out. And so because she's doing the chemotherapy at this point, and she's, you know, starting to deal with the effects of that. And so they're sitting in the living room now talking, and, you know, it was an emotional moment. She, you know, was, basically like, she knew that the chemo was going to be rough, but she didn't think that, she would have to deal with these side effects so soon. And, Mildred starts talking about, they should go to Mexico, and how, she's done research, and they're having a lot of success with people who were once terminal with, I guess, certain types of cancer, and they are now in remission. And so, they kind of fantasized about them going to Mexico and having this great, I guess, house on the beach, and, they could sit out. And it was mainly her, Briggs, talking about how it would be not so much for the treatment, but so much for, like, her last few days to be, peaceful in a beautiful place. And, that's how she could end her life. And that's how she would, want to go. And, they had an emotional scene for a minute. And then Nurse Ratched, she go to the hospital, and you can see she's shocked at how things have turned around since Nurse Bucket took over. And so now she's in the office with Nurse Bucket, and Nurse Bucket is basically telling her that she hired a female doctor, and how things are a lot better, because she's not shackled with Dr. Hanover's requests and requirements and needs and the whole thing. And then she said, I know why you're here. You want to know what's going to happen with Edmund when he at his execution. And so she starts going through the step by step, so what's what to expect when it's time for Edmund's execution. And what she did say was that what she will do for his last 2 weeks, because they are a hospital and it is their job to treat the patients. And so she said, the barn is finished. They now have the animals in there. She said for at least 1 hour a day, she'll let Edmund go to the barn, and he could, help with the animals, or, just to be out, just to have something to do for at least 1 hour a day. And so, the thing is, so they, she bring Edmund out with the security, brings him out to the barn, and she tells him how she thinks it's going to be therapeutic for him. This is Nurse Bucket, and how he has 1 hour a day. She, even though he is a violent criminal, that she feel like he should still be treated humanely, and that this will be good for him. So they take him into the barn to take the shackles off. And so when you think he's there alone with the animals, next you hear a clicking sound. And he realized that, no, there are like 4 armed police officers in the rafters. And basically one of the officers tell him that if you make any kind of false move, we're going to blow your brains out. So we flash to a man named Case, I guess that was his name, Case Hitchison. It's now time for his execution. And, he's doing the long walk, and, he makes it to the room. And of course, Governor, Walton, I can't remember that man's name, the governor, he's there, and he's saying, giving his little speech about how he killed this 7-year-old kid, and how they were talking about doing the lethal injection, and then he pulls the cover off, and it's the electric chair. So he feels that the man's crime is so horrible that the lethal injection would be too humane. And much to the surprise of, it seemed like mostly everybody there when they saw the electric chair. So they sit him in the electric chair. And I guess during this time they would broadcast these executions. So there, you have the staff at the hospital listening to what's going on. They could, there's a reporters there giving blah, blah, blah of what's going on. And so he sits him in the electric chair, and they get him strapped in, and the man is obviously, fighting, because, who wouldn't, right? So Nurse Bucket is about to leave, and Nurse Ratched is about to leave, and Nurse Bucket calls her over, and so now it's a group of them just standing around listening to this broadcast. And so they weren't able to go through the proper checks, to get him strapped in. They put the sponge, at least I thought they would put, the wet sponge on his head, on the person's head. I guess it's supposed to help to conduct the electricity, so it's not as harsh as it could be. And then they flipped the switch, but that's not what happened. They barely got the man in the chair before the governor flipped the switch. And this man that mess was so horrific. The man actually caught fire. You had one of the guys standing next to the governor. He wanted to turn the machine off. The governor pulls him away from the machine. There's flames coming off this man. Now keep in mind, the whole time the staff at the hospital, including Nurse Ratched, is listening to the screams of this man. The people who were there on the other side of the glass are horrified. It was just, it was a spectacle, right? Which was his point. And eventually he turns off the machine, and Nurse Bucky, you can see in her face, like she has come to the conclusion, like, I cannot let this happen to my brother. And so the governor walks over, this is before they close the curtain, and said, pronounce the time of death. And so people are just sitting there with their mouths hanging open, like, I just cannot believe what I witnessed, right? So he is so proud of himself. He's now sitting at the restaurant. He's eating his steak. Briggs and Ratched walk in. Apparently, Briggs has set up the meeting, and because he said, I didn't know when we set up this meeting that Nurse Ratched would be accompanying you. And so they started talking, and Briggs is telling him, like, the electric chair is so archaic. It's taking us, so many steps back. Why not go for a more humane form, like the lethal injection or the gas chamber? And he basically said that you have to understand, politics is not about policies anymore. It's about pleasing the masses. That was basically his whole thing. And this is what they want. They want to see that I'm tough on crime. And as he was leaving, Nurse Ratched stands up and basically said that, Edmund is my brother. And if you think I'm going to just let you, cause him all this suffering and pain, then you have another thing coming. So Briggs jumps up and say, basically, honey, just let it go. And he's like, oh, okay. He said, just the thing, I can't believe that I didn't recognize it, who you guys really were, earlier. And then he walks over to him and say, my sister, has the same issues that you guys have. And I do feel sorry for you guys, and good luck, and don't forget to vote for me. And this prick walks out. He's such an ass, right? So now their only course of action is to talk to Nurse Bucket. So now they're sitting talking to Nurse Bucket, and she wants to come up with a plan to give. Even she knows at this point she cannot get Edmund out of the punishment that is waiting for him. And so her goal now is just to make it as humane as possible. And so Briggs and Ratched are now sitting down with Nurse Bucket, and she's like, okay, so what do you have planned? So the plan is to, allow him to go into the barn and see with the animals, and Nurse Ratched is going to be there, and Finnegan is actually going to come out and give him the first injection. It's the injection that puts him to sleep, and that she would administer the injection that stops his heart, and he would die in her arms. And Nurse Bucket is like, as a nurse, I'm good morally. I am against taking of a life, but she said that looking at the alternative, this seems to be the more humane way. And she even offered to do the injection, but Nurse Ratched felt like it was only right for her to do it, and so they agreed to do it. So in the next scene, you see Nurse Ratched. She's taking Paulson his food, and remember, they haven't spoken to each other since he was brought back to the hospital. And he has this tray is laid out, and he's like, well, what is all this about? And what's going on? Where have you been? And they start talking, and he was he sat down and started eating. He's like, why, I'm going to be executed in 2 weeks. Well, it is 2 weeks, right? You didn't put poison in my food, right? And so she, was, of course, like, how dare you? And then they started talking, and she asked him, why did he do what he did? Like, why didn't he stick to their plan? And he tells her that it was love. He did it because, out of love. And she was like, well, why couldn't you love me? Why couldn't you, just basically stick to the plan and just stay and let me continue to fix, do what I needed to do. And of course, they had to address the issue of him feeling abandoned, and he was like, well, you you left me, you abandoned me. And because actually first she said, everything I've done for you. And he was like, well, everything I've done for you, and you abandoned me. And you ran. And she was like, well, you told me to run. And she was like, I was just a kid, and how, I'm sorry, and how, and so he's like, okay, is that it? So you just gonna give up on me? And she was like, Edward, you don't get it, do you? And he kind of looked at her confused. She was like, I'm grateful to you because you saved my life when he killed the adoptive parent. And then you can see on his face. And she was like, I would never give up on you. And after that, the next scene is Nurse Bucket. She's in the office. A nurse comes to tell her that Charlotte Wells has returned. And so she's kind of looking confused because they all know that she left with Dr. Hanover. So she goes out to the lobby, and of course there she is, big as day, Charlotte Wells sitting there. And she's saying, can I help you? She's like, of course you can, that's why I'm here. And so she gets up and sashays on to Dr. Hanover's office. The next she's sitting behind Hanover's desk going through papers, and Nurse Bucket is trying to figure out, okay, so how can I help you? And she was like, I'm not Charlotte, I'm Dr. Hanover. So she's now developed a new personality. Now she's Dr. Hanover, and she's looking through the files on the desk and talking about how, I have so much work to do and da-da-da-da. And so, Nurse Bucket eventually leaves to say, okay, because she kept asking for Edmund. I bring Edmund to me, and, I need to work on his treatment, da-da-da-da. And so she leaves to go get selling Charlotte, aka Dr. Hanover, that she's going to get Edmund. But what she really did, she went to get Finnegan. So Finnegan and her walks into the office. There are two sets of doors to get into Hanover's office, and both are double doors. So they walk into the first set. Nurse Bucket tells them to close the first set of doors because they don't want, if things get out of control, they don't want to disturb the other patients. But what they didn't realize was that while she was left in the office going through the stuff, that she found Dr. Hanover's gun. So as Nurse Bucket walks into the room, because Finnegan was still by the first set of double doors, Nurse Charlotte is now pointing the gun at Nurse Bucket and talking about how she needs to get Edmund, and how Edmund is going to be the key to everything, and da-da-da. Finnegan eventually walks in, and he starts talking about the dance and how, how happy she was, and I forget the security guard's name, and she was like, yeah, he had kind eyes, and he was the first person that looked at me like I was a normal person, and it seemed like he was getting through to her, and he was, was going to get the gun, and then she shoots Finnegan in the head and kills him. So now Finnegan is dead, and Nurse Bucket is sitting there in shock. She cannot believe that she just shot Finnegan. So now he's still saying that he wants Edmund, and she's going to take him to Edmund, but of course the gunshot alerted the police officers in the hospital. So now, as they're leaving the office, one of the guards, they could see that Nurse Bucket is distressed, and he's trying to figure out, well, what's going on and who's with you, because he's not familiar with Charlotte. And so Charlotte grabs Nurse Bucket and grab by the arm, basically pulls her around the corner. The guard is still trying to figure out, okay, well, Nurse Bucket, well, who was that? Da, da, da. So he makes it to the corner, and and then Charlotte ends up hitting him with the gun, knocking him out. They leave to go into the other, area of the facility where they're holding Edmund. And they meet with the first security guard, and they, have polite chit chat, and he eventually lets them onto the elevator so they can go down. But I guess he wasn't a dupe, because when they got down, the other officer already had his gun drawn and basically saying, we learned that there was a security breach and what is going on here. And Charlotte still has the gun, and she's saying that she wants to talk to Edmund, and the man was basically like, no, I'm not going to do that. So she ends up killing the police officer. So this is the third person she's killed, okay, at this point. It was Hanover, it was Finnegan, and now this police officer she's killed to get to Edmund. So they get through the gate. She's now talking to him, as Dr. Hanover was saying that, you're the key to everything, and I'm going to do what I can to help you get him out of this whole thing, right? And so he's like, oh, so you're crazy too, right? So he's now out of the cell. And before he leaves, he grabs this officer's gun and he's now pointing it at Bucket. And he's like, wait, what is going on here? Why is this woman breaking me out and not Mildred? And she's like, what does she have? I thought she had a plan. And is this part of the plan? And so Nurse Bucket is like, no, this is not part of the plan. And then she realized, oh shit. So now she was like, well, no, she doesn't have any plan. I don't know about any plan. And then he eventually tells her that if you lie to me again, I'm going to blow your brains out. And so she ends up telling him that her plan was to euthanize you. You know, she knew that you were headed to the electric chair, and she didn't want that for you, and she wanted you to have a more humane death. So he ends up locking Nurse Bucket in the cell. They jump into Charlotte's car, and he was like, oh, nice wheels. He's like, yeah, Nurse Ratched sent me, quite a bit of money. And so, I was able to buy, I had some money to spend, so I just got this nice little ride. So they jump in the car, and they're driving down, the long stretch of road to get out of the hospital. And as they're driving down the road to leave, Nurse Ratched is driving in. She's coming into work, and of course they pass. They lock eyes. I don't know if she saw Charlotte. I mean, I can imagine she would, but she eventually stops her car, get out, and turn, and he's now looking back at her, and she watched them as they drive away. Okay, so here we are. It's 1950. It's 1950. They're in Mexico, Charlotte and Briggs, and it seemed like Briggs is doing quite well, and they seem as happy as they could be. And Nurse Ratched gives Briggs the newspaper, and she starts asking her if she see anything, and basically she's checking to see if there are any stories on Paulson and Charlotte, because she hasn't seen or heard from them since that day. And so while they were talking, there was a knock at the door. They go out. It's actually Nurse Bucket coming to visit, and they're kind of now sitting on the beach, and they're talking about how great life is and how wonderful things are. And you can see in Nurse Ratched's face that she went from being quite happy to now kind of forlorn and deep in her thoughts. And they asked her, and Nurse Bucket asked her, like, well, what, what's going on? You got quiet all of a sudden. And she was like, I don't feel like things are over. I don't feel like things have been finished between me and Edmund, and it's only a matter of time before he comes for me. And so she leaves, to go back to the room, and she said that she was going to get her book. But as she was walking to the room, she felt like she was being watched. And so she made it to her room. There's a knock at the door. She opens the door. It's Charlotte. Charlotte is talking about how she's been completely cured. And she's like, oh, well, how did that happen? So now they're talking, and Nurse Ratched has a gun now drawn, and she's like, well, where's my brother? And Charlotte was like, he's behind you. So she turns around, and he's standing there at the door with a knife, and they're going back and forth. I guess she tries to shoot him. The gun is empty, and he ends up stabbing her. Then you realize, okay, it's a nightmare. So she jumps up out of her sleep. Nurse Briggs is trying to comfort her and just let her know, okay, it's fine. It was just a nightmare. You're here. You're safe. You're fine. And then there's a knock at the door. It's in fact Nurse Bucket coming to visit. And so they're now sitting down at the little cafe or little restaurant having breakfast, and they're talking, and Nurse Bucket is talking about how beautiful the place was, and how they've given her a promotion, they've doubled her salary, and life is good for her at this point. And now she has a wonderful place that she can come and visit for her 2-week vacation every year. And while she's talking, you could hear the phone rings, and Charlotte instinctively realized that, okay, there's something up, right? So she turns, and she could see the maitre d', I guess the guy at the bar, and the maitre d' talking, and he of course brings the phone over to her, and she walks off with the phone. That was the longest damn phone cord I've ever seen in my life. So she walks away from the table with the phone cord, and she was like, hello, Edmund. And he was like, well, how did you know it was me? And she was like, well, I know every thought in your head before you have it. And so they started talking, and it was mainly about an article that Nurse Briggs talked about in the paper, where there was, in Chicago, 7 nurses were murdered. And I think that was an actual event. I believe that was Chicago, where the nurses were killed. And she knew deep down that was Paulson. So now they're talking, and she basically said that I knew that, that story was to get my attention. Now you have my attention. And he was like, aren't you even curious as to how I knew where you were? She was like, well, not really, but the only way that you would know where I was is if someone betrayed me. And when I find out who betrayed me, they're going to suffer dearly. And he was about to start talking, and she basically said that, let me tell you what's going to happen. I already know what you're going to say. You're going to say that, that you're coming for me and that I should be scared, but no, you need to understand something. You should be scared because I'm coming for you. And she hung up. And so as he was walking out of the little, I guess, gas station, he had put like a quarter or something on the desk, on the counter, and took something, got in the car, and then we realized who betrayed them. That damn alcoholic leech whisperer Louise is in the backseat of that damn car, and her and Charlotte are going back and forth about, well, it's not Charlotte, it's her and Miss Duquette are going back and forth about music or whatever they were talking about. And Louise was like, well, all I asked you to do was change the channel, change the station, right? So he gets in the car, and now these three lunatics are driving down the road, and you see Nurse Ratched. She's kind of deep in thought, like how, what her next move is going to be. And that's how the season ends. Paulson, Charlotte, and Louise are on the run, and now Nurse Ratched is trying to figure out basically what her next move is going to be so that she's prepared for when Paulson strikes. So I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.